Hello and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. This one is from True Parley Grandmaster Foot. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's going to take a little bit more to set up than usual. The topic we're going to discuss is reasons not to push the frontiers of art. So Mr. Foot did this big Parley series about this concept called the invisible wall. This is from a Yokotaro game developer's talk. And basically the idea is that there's these games that are commonly made and games that we physically can't make. We don't have the technology or something. But then there's a place in between them, past the invisible wall, not a real wall, where we could make these games in this way, but we just frequently don't. So this might be because it's outside scope, a game that is ridiculously difficult to balance and for which balance is very important. It could be because they would be considered undesirable to the market, or like it seems awkward to present them to people. A game which is the most fulfilling 15 minutes you have on planet Earth, but that's the whole game and it's like $60 or something. Is an example Yokotaro gives. Excuse me, choking on my, it's a good example. Or it could even be something like just covering a subject matter that is considered challenging enough that you need to navigate it delicately, or most people just don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Could be stuff like that. And the Parley series had a bunch of examples of this. It's a cool series. You don't need to have seen that series to watch this. In fact, I would encourage you to watch this as a way to decide if you were interested in that series. Here's the prompt then. In our final podcast discussion on the series, I, Mr. Foot, had asked what was missing from this series. Zandy's response was that it's the counterpoint to all that. What would someone say who's not into the idea of exploring the invisible wall, the frontiers of design? It's Zandy's suggestion, so he'll figure it out from here. Yeah, I'm good. I don't need any further prompting than that. Indeed, this is like 2/3 my Parley prompt, though I didn't ask you to submit this one. I'd mentioned it when we were talking and you decided you wanted it. I think that there are two primary things I want to do in this Parley. The first one is to discuss what I imagine are general objections to this topic. I think a pretty obvious one is it just sounds pretentious, right? We have to unpack that. That seems like the obvious thing. What are some objections I foresee from the general public and maybe some ways around them? And then I also have some, I think, different objections. And I very differently motivated objections. Now, in this Parley, I am not going to go on to argue that you shouldn't push the frontiers of art. I think that this is mostly a good thing to do. But this is a key thesis for this whole Parley. It is not an inherently good thing to do. It's good, consistently, because it extremely overwhelmingly often is useful to innovate. It is not always valuable to innovate, though. It's extremely often valuable, but that's meaningfully different from it being always good to do. An example I like to give is effort. Effort is really fetishized by our culture because it's extremely frequently valuable to care about exerting effort. And it's part of the social contract, although it's fading as part of the social contract. However, it's also very important to acknowledge when effort is not useful. Effort is not magic. There's no inherent value added to something. You don't earn validity as a person by putting a lot of effort into something. Nothing makes anyone valid as a person. We are invalid, meaningless, dust in the wind, and that is completely fine, actually. That's just what's true, and it's okay, and that's not bad. It's very freeing to feel like there's no need to earn validity. It just doesn't exist in the first place. People can just accept you for who you are. You don't need to, find a way to magically, elementally gain that quality in yourself. It's not a magic system. Effort is just frequently useful. The key thing for me is that it's more important when effort isn't useful than when it is. So even though it's usually useful, I think it's still important to focus on when it isn't, because those situations just matter more. For example, it's really common that people working on a piece of entertainment, this is the big place where it comes up, will say, oh, but we worked really hard on it. Or people who like the piece of entertainment will say, no, it's got these flaws, but they put so much work into it, and etc. Those people are having a real positive experience. They're not delusional. They're not apologizing for the piece of work. They might be literally just lying to feel correct, but let's assume they like the work. They really do like it. It's not an illusion, and their enjoyment isn't fake. If somebody likes something you don't, right? They really do like it. It's not they might be lying, but for all intents and purposes, you can assume they do really like the piece of work. But in many cases, the perception of effort in the work, they have outside materials that make the work something different from what other people are experiencing. And I find that people are very hesitant to allow this argument for some reason. I guess because it feels like saying they're wrong. They're not. They just didn't experience the same thing as the other people who disagree with them. They experienced something else. Both people have eminently sensible perspectives on the piece of perceptions on the piece of art that they consumed. That's why they perceive it that way, because it makes sense from their perspective. Of course, why would it be otherwise? And so people who think the art is better because they put a lot of work into it probably like watch the documentary, and they themselves have a relationship with that kind of effort. And so those two things added to the piece of art, yes, are good in the way they describe, but that is meaningfully distinct from saying that the piece of art alone is better because of the effort attributed to it. After all, where is that effort? Can you like smell or taste it when you use the piece of art? I would imagine no. It is not a magic thing. It is a piece of media that was physically made, and therefore it is the pieces that are in it. It does not gain some esoteric further quality from how great or poor the expenditure of resources to create it was. Maybe obviously. And people often get themselves tied up in knots like, I don't want to like something that was easy to make. But why not? It's even more impressive. The person who made it gave you entertainment for a very efficient exchange of effort or resources to entertainment. If you like an entertainer, wouldn't you like them to make things that you enjoy more if the quality didn't suffer? And therefore, if they were able to expend less effort, but not really less effort, but less time, essentially. It could be more effort and less time. People often mean time by effort as well, right? That's not work smarter, not harder. And that would be good. It would be good if the person you liked was able to make the thing you liked without quality compromises in less time, which they probably can in many cases. I think it's really interesting when you discuss professionals versus like a hobby artist, if you want to think of it this way. This is not better or worser, but the result, worser is a fun word, isn't it? Is that people will compare what you want to cut. You know, the professional might cut corners in places where a hobbyist would bear pains to not cut those corners. But the thing is, done well, I think we can agree that cutting some corners is obviously better than attempting to cut literally 0 corners. Never, ever not putting the maximum effort into everything is obviously just worse than sometimes not putting the maximum effort into everything, because some things don't benefit significantly from you putting more effort into them, and effort is not magic. I think I did it. When I worded it that last way, some of you cringed a little bit. Some of you, when I said putting effort, you shouldn't put the most effort into everything, a lot of you thought when I said that, no, that you should do that actually. But you can agree with me that there at least isn't any apparent utility in doing so. You mean something like, it's good to put the most effort into everything because it makes you the kind of person who expends a lot of effort into things. But I'll say again, I'm not objecting to being that kind of person. I'm saying specifically in these moments, if you could be that kind of person, but still not waste effort in places where it didn't provide a benefit, wouldn't that be better? And it would. If you disagree, you just disagree that it's possible to be that kind of person, not that it would be better to not waste effort. It would be better not to waste effort. I'm not trying to corner you into agreeing with me. I just want to acknowledge that there is some further contents to the idea that people think effort or time is inherently good. Again, the same thing with pushing the frontiers of art. This is a thing that can be good to do frequently, but I think it is more important when it is not good to do. That's less common, but you can just assume it's good to do most of the time, so it's more useful to think about when it isn't useful to do. That's my shtick. Okay, so now 2 perspectives. With that thesis in mind, I mostly think this is good, but I think it matters when it isn't, basically. That's my argument. I want to talk mostly about something a little less directly related, which is what I think a lot of people would object to in general about innovating in art, and then I'm going to give my specific objection. General audience objections to innovations in art. I started by quipping that it's pretentiousness, right? It's going to be that people think Hideo Kojima or Yoko Taro are just being weird, and it's just weird and overcomplicated, and it's bad. The fundaments of this argument might be a little simple, but I actually think they're very worth unpacking, just not necessarily that airtight. So if you'll go with me. people often make this dint that, oh well, when the literary text says the curtains were blue and the blue reminded me of my childhood where I was depressed and blah blah blah, and they'll scratch all that out and say no, the curtains were just blue, there's no subtext, and it's silly for you to be looking for subtext everywhere, making your case by pretending that there's all this deep meaning in every line when there isn't. The author just wrote that the curtains are blue. This is a perspective that I think comes from this idea that people do invent meaning in stories and interpret things unilaterally to create their narrative that is correct. Before we lampoon this perspective for being anti-intellectual and acting like nobody could ever intend anything and things can't be deep and are never deep and it's silly to try to understand things, like that's dumb, and I'm not going to give it much more air than that here. No, actually, the world is interesting and complicated, and it's like normal to mean things when you write things. That's just commonplace, actually. It's not only not strange or a reach, it's also nearly always the case. Like, people usually did have some reason for picking that to be that way. It might not matter, but it's not like weird to wonder why the curtains are blue or whatever. It is misused, though. Before we lampoon that idea, we need to acknowledge that it is misused. The people making that complaint are a little bit correct. You'll find that the stupidest opinions in the world are also the opinions that are of wrong opinions. Stupid opinions are often like a tiny bit correct, but then just aggressively wrong for the rest of it. Whereas smarter but incorrect opinions sound more feasible, but are just flat out completely untrue. It's just a hypothesis that didn't work. Whereas a lot of the time, the general public's complaints that are silly, yeah, like you're like 5% exactly right, but then just 95% that's just not happening. Sure, 1 out of every 20 or 30 literature students, in my experience, from going into a literature program in college, just makes up interpretations of things totally unilaterally, and the way that the class has to react is like, maybe that could be true because good criticism means we don't mythologize the intent of the author. It doesn't really matter what they specifically intended. We're looking for reasonable interpretations of the text. And it's very difficult to argue that Joe interpreter over there did not make a theoretically reasonable interpretation of the text. Look at how elaborately they're describing it. But there's still such a thing as looking at evidence in a text and saying this is a more or less useful reading, or a more or less interesting reading. The pieces in the puzzle that the author has built, doesn't matter what puzzle they had in mind, but they've built pieces in a certain way. And they may or may not fit together better or worse with the narrative of interpreting the blue curtains this way. That is the flaw. It's not silly to interpret things. It's anti-intellectual to think you should not interpret things. Like, why not? They have meaning all the time. That's normal. It's weird that people think that they don't. That being said, sure, a lot of the time that you hear people giving anything other than the most orthodox reading of a story, it seems like a total reach. Fine. Yes, that does happen. Who cares? Like, ignore those people and move on. That doesn't make it silly to interpret things. Just ignore the people that do it that way. Now, obviously, it's not that easy to do that, but the point of this parlay is not to unpack how you survive a literature class. It's to describe reasons not to go for innovations in art. And this is mostly not one of them. Basically, the argument would be that being deep is like bad, actually. But I mean, so it is whatever benefits it provides. Like, let's just unpack what the benefits of being deep are. The people who are criticizing being deep aren't unpacking the benefits of being deep, so let's just do it for them, and we'll see if it's valuable. Because if it isn't, then making art less accessible by making it deeper probably doesn't make that much sense. If you have to make the art different and therefore less recognizable, and therefore immediately, initially at least, cause a little bit of friction, like sandpaper on the entryway to your abode, maybe that is not a good idea if it isn't clear that there is some benefit to depthening a piece of entertainment or art. But there are good arguments for depthening a piece of entertainment or art. One of them is that it can help you guide yourself through some thinking. Art and entertainment are, in my opinion, importantly therapy. A very important pillar of art and entertainment is therapy, in my opinion. Not necessarily the common way you would think about therapy, where you go to a therapist, but a kind of meditation adjacent therapy, where you get into a mental mode that is important to have in your life, of experiencing something with no real threat, but where you are still engaging with it. That is actively taking a stake in something that cannot harm you. I would argue this is mental exploration therapy, a certain kind of active meditation. You might even summarize it as something like play, but it's again a different form of play than normal. Play, where you play a video game or a sport, is very directly active, and you can lose more material things. Your time if you die against the boss, maybe an injury if you play a sport. That's completely fine, like whatever, this is just a normal part of entertainment. But there's a different kind of play of the mind, where you experience a piece of entertainment like watching a movie, and you get to chew on thoughts, you get to think about things, you get to do things mentally, but there is absolutely no risk or stakes insofar as like the movie will just continue and end. It doesn't matter what you do. If you just leave it alone, the movie will run and be over at the end. The story just kind of goes on. You are, maybe we should summarize all that by calling it spectating, is very healthy, I think, and a big part of art. Up there alongside more popular ones like I think that improvisation is really important to all art in some form. Again, it might not be the way you'd think of it. And therapy doesn't usually involve leaving everything exactly the way it is. It's important to recognize here that a lot of humans think of themselves as being people who want to find the next thing in the genre they like, that they want to enjoy, but they have no way of knowing for sure that they would actually prefer to have something like that. They view it instead as more of a safety. They're not saying, I've checked, and this is the way of finding entertainment I like the most. They're saying, I haven't checked, and this is the way of finding more entertainment for me that I feel the least risk. I feel it is the most likely I will get what I want close enough by doing it this way. Not, I feel this is the best way for me to get my entertainment. Maybe obviously when I put it like that. People do not know everything in the universe and therefore don't have perfect knowledge of exactly what would make them the happiest. Obviously, but they're trying to do the thing that they think makes them the best off. Yeah, sure. It's just a meaningful distinction to say they're trying to do what they think would make them the best off, but almost invariably they are definitely wrong that would make them the best off. We're all basically definitely wrong. I love waking up every morning knowing I will be slightly wrong about the way to make myself best off, and at the end of the day I will have learned to do that better. It's very satisfying if you embrace it in that way. But initially scary, fine, whatever. The point of this is just to say that just because a lot of people think that it's inaccessible to engage with your like weird art thing that you're doing doesn't mean it actually is bad or inaccessible to do that. After all, a lot of entertainment starts with a kind of bump where you get a little bit of investment or patience from the audience. And you can use this to set up the beginning of your story. A lot of the time, the audience will then be happy you did that and go on to say like the middle and the end of the story was good. Audiences over-fixate on the ending of stories, sure, or entertainment or art in general, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad to exchange some value at the beginning of a story for some value later in a story. That's fine and normal, and it can be interesting. People want to dig into an interesting new story or environment. They just might not always immediately think that they do. So I don't think that alone is any reason at all not to make things that are more involved. But what is the benefit of doing it? Not just it's bad, it's actually not that bad. But what is the benefit? I think the main benefit is that there's more thinking to do. You have a healthy amount of runway where you move through the story a little bit. A really common way of revealing things like mysteries or surprises in stories is to provide a bunch of hints, order them in terms of most vague to later least vague, and then also provide a red herring, some feasible possibility to distract the audience so that they have the pieces to solve the mystery, but for some reason don't explore those pieces the same way they normally would, allowing you to give them the mystery and the solution to the mystery and make them feel like they absolutely could have solved it, but increase the chance that they think in a different way than normal. A bit of sleight of hand that can cause them to not be cheated, but just not come up with the answer. Again, a red herring here is not a totally unrelevant thing that comes out of nowhere and just has nothing to do with anything, but is instead something that is a feasible possibility which is simply wrong, and the author knows it's wrong when they present it, but it's just presented as a possibility, and the reader maybe takes that route instead. Give the reader an option on the multiple choice test that can let them feel like they picked something, but that wasn't necessarily just correct. You didn't just give them the answer. Obviously, when this becomes a trope, sometimes it can be exploited, and you can have the red herring be the actual thing, and we're not getting into that here. But anyway, whatever you think about that way of doing things, I'm sure you would agree that engaging in the mystery is more fun. Having a mystery and then you're just told exactly what happened is less fun than a mystery where you see some things that could have happened and then you find out what happened. Fair to agree to this? Are we cool with that point? And this is an example in my mind of exploring the frontiers of art a little to make something more interesting than it would have been otherwise. I also think, as a simple example, often not telling the audience about a restriction would be more interesting than telling them if we find out later and it's scary. So like in the Avengers movie, is it Infinity War or is it the thing after Endgame? There's this situation with the time travel where they're basically told like it will be fine and there's not going to be a time loop and that's not how that works. Don't worry. And isn't it more interesting to worry about that? The narrative doesn't want to be distracted and it wants to move you along. But in a way, it would kind of be more interesting if there was more of a risk of doing that. And there kind of are in that story and in some others. There are usually some things you have to do, a kind of etiquette, I like to think of them as, where you need to behave a certain way while using the time travel or it messes everything up. Sure. But that's the point, isn't it? Those are interesting restrictions. And the story instead saying, oh, but like, don't worry about this though. It's like, yeah, narratively, it would be kind of cool to worry about that, actually. It might just overcomplicate a story that isn't going to focus on that or doesn't use good technique to express it. Sure, I'm not necessarily saying that would be right for Avengers Endgame. I'm just pointing out that the trope of time travel, going back in time, and then you need to like avoid meeting your past self or whatever, is interesting, don't you think? And that is an example of the story being a little bit more involved is kind of just better than the story being a little less involved. At some point, the story will be evolved enough, sure enough, that people who don't have experience with this type of media will not get it. And this is also almost entirely an upside. This will still have an audience in many cases if the story is good, and you're competing with less people because the story is more narrow, and those people get more specifically what they want and have invested more in their interests, so you'll make more money per person who's interested. I know most business people don't hear any words until I say the word money, so that was just to wake up all of those folks. Welcome. And then it will be enjoyable, and this is good. And there will be lots of general, applicable to the general public works without us trying, so there's no need to specifically make those. You might as well make things as deep as you think benefits the work, and you can coherently express to people, and that often won't be that deep, and that's cool. But it's not like bad to try to make it that way. Have we thoroughly established this? The general public arguments to pushing the frontiers of art are, in my opinion, not very interesting. I think it's mostly just people saying they don't get it, or they disagree that putting effort into your entertainment is ever beneficial, but it's pretty easy to demonstrate that that is not true even for them, let alone for other people. So I personally don't think it's worth too much more fussing about. I definitely don't think that if you are an artist of any capacity, you should worry about this even a little bit. You should just try to make things that are good. And if they are good, but in a way that isn't exactly what you imagined, like they're good, but it's not as deep as you thought, but serving the story, trying to write the best story you could, it ended up being that you reduced the story's complexity. I think that you ought to accept that and say, it's okay, this is going to be good for a certain type of person, and I have to accept that that is what I was able to produce. If you want to make something else, work hard to make it good, sure. But only if it benefits the story. Hard work, remember? And I think that that's a better way to do it. I think that people like what you make better when you do that. And if you can be at peace with things just being the way they are and not worry about something being inaccessible, none of us are that special. There are other people that like the thing you like. I think that's kind of just better. I think people tend to tear themselves up over this subject for a variety of reasons, and another one of them is the money thing, again, for which I have less to say. I don't work in the professional industry. Just to say there are many people in my own creative social circle who work just fine with a smaller and more niche audience, including myself and many of my other colleagues in the industry. It is not at all a non-viable business strategy. You ought not to mistake the fact that the general public usually thinks of it as, oh, you have to get the most famous, more number is better number, as being the only viable strategy. It is not. And I could give you plenty of examples of much more successful people than me that still took this strategy if you wanted me to. Moving on for now. There's also an objection to this idea that entertainment is work at all. That I don't want to unpack at too much length, but basically it goes that it's not that things being deeper is bad. It's that needing to expend any effort into your entertainment is bad. Not that more thinking about your entertainment is bad, but that any is bad. I think this is slightly different. These people argue that the ideal entertainment is to sit on the couch and watch a funny cartoon, and you don't have to use your brain at all, and that's why it's the most enjoyable. But I do not believe that this is actually what is occurring. I think that they're using their brain just as much as I am relative to their own experience, and they're just used to that, and I'm used to, well, something else. And again, I feel that what you're really saying when you say that is that you don't agree that it can be rewarding to think through things or to engage in something. You might not feel it right now, but I'm not saying you are wrong for not enjoying this right now. You're not. It's perfectly sensible. You enjoy whatever you want right now. But that argument gestures at the idea that even if you tried over time, in the long term, you would still not enjoy investing yourself more in something. And I think it is clear to see that that is incorrect. I think that if you look around at our human experience, you can see that there are times in your life, in all of our lives, where you did put effort into something, whether you liked it or not. And there have been times in your life where by the end you did like that thing. It is a little silly if you fully unpack it, which these people didn't, and that's why they don't think it's silly. If you fully unpack it, to argue that like people don't like putting effort into things, it's just inherently wrong, and that everybody who's into a subject just wants to seem smart. They're putting in all of that effort. Their whole life is just about other people thinking more highly of them. Yeah, for some people, that's true. Again, this is the case where, yeah, 5% of the time you're exactly right, but like, who cares? Just ignore those people. And 95% of the time, no, that's silly. Obviously, people are putting that much effort in because they like it. I would hope, obviously, on some level. Most people do not care that much about, to be blunt, anything, let alone other people's opinions. Just because there are some people for whom that's true doesn't matter at all, in my opinion. I don't know. Like, you just ignore those people. It's usually very obvious, which is you can be grateful for. And if you don't think it's usually obvious, simply ask people to explain. You don't have to be mean, just politely show interest and say, wow, you're really interested in this subject. You really enjoy wine. What do you enjoy about wine specifically? Have you tried tasting other things, and what do you prefer less about those? Like, what is it about wine specifically that speaks to you? No need to overly judge. They'll tell you whatever their answers are, and you will see whether those reasons are utility, wine actually provides them a specific benefit, or like more of an intellectual thing. They like that they know about the wine, but they're not talking about like tasting the wine. They're saying like, I know a lot about wine, basically. Okay, I mean, whatever. You can just accept that that seems to be why they're interested. It's really not that much of a mystery if you just ask people what about the thing that they like. You know, what do I like about tea? It's a readily available source of a 0-calorie drink. I'm not affected by the stimulating effect of caffeine, so I can basically just drink as much tea as I want for an extremely cheap price. I can have a interestingly flavorful drink with a wide variety of flavors within the same category, and it has essentially no effect on me physiologically. I mean, I'm sure it does. Tea has a lot of effects on the body physiologically, but this tea isn't called the physiology of drinking tea, is it? This parlay isn't called the physiology of drinking tea. So we'll leave it there for now. But you get the point. For me, it's the utility of the thing. And as you know, if you watch the tea time streams, I also enjoy coffee and alcohol and drinks that don't have caffeine or alcohol in them, or basically anything else that is even remotely similar, because what I care about is the utility of the thing. I don't care at all about my knowledge about the thing and would rather claim that I have less of it rather than more. That seems to be to my advantage. I don't want people to think of my activity as, ooh, tea is cool, but I wish I was the kind of person who would be smart and intellectual enough to get interested in tea. What? I literally just bought some tea on, like, just go buy some tea. It's, no, like, just go do it. I want people to think that my interest is unintellectual, is just basic and obvious, not something that I specifically am just so smart and so much better of a person that I do. It's like telling someone successful that they just, you can't be people who are so talented. It's like, don't you dare wipe away their potential effort and cleverness that they exerted. Like, no, they did not get here just through talent. That's virtually impossible in the modern age anyway. They might have gotten here through luck, but even then, most of those people are pretty aware of that. It's weird. Anyway, and so I don't know. I personally just think if people are anxious that other people are being like highfalutin or elitist or overly intellectual or whatever, just ask them why they're interested in that. And then you can just decide if you think that reason is interesting. There's no reason to be afraid of what their reasoning is, except that there is, as we transition to the next part of the parlay. We don't really have time to fully unpack this, but the reason a lot of people resist this is because if it's revealed that you have a good reason to like the thing you like, and it isn't a reason that is like it's mentally inaccessible to them, instead it's just obvious and it's beneficial to basically everybody, the next thing that will happen is that most people will think, now that says something bad about me because I should be doing this as well. What I would like to say, as someone who I think causes this feeling in a lot of people, is I don't think you should. I think that you should take it at your own pace and get to enjoy it the way I did. Not rush into it because it makes you a specifically better person. You have to pay the opportunity cost of spending that part of your life getting into that thing. It might be better to try getting into something else at this particular time. You don't have to feel bad that there is a good thing out there that is good, and there is no real reason why you shouldn't be experiencing right now, but you are not experiencing it. That's not bad or wrong of you. That doesn't say something negative about you as a person, because that has always and will always be true for the rest of time. You will always be doing something less well than you could be. There will always be something. There isn't any reason you shouldn't do, but you just don't know to or decide not to do it anyway. There has always and will always be those things. So there's really no reason to be worried about finding out that there actually really isn't any reason not to do this thing that does not say something bad about you for not doing it. I don't know if anybody actually needs to hear that during this parlay. I'm also just saying it rhetorically. I'm not trying to argue that the fact that things being deep is actually just normal and interesting and kind of just better means that then you're some kind of idiot if you don't enjoy those things. I just want you to feel like you are allowed to enjoy them. That's it. That's my shtick ends there. And personally, I think that is a finite enough dismissal for now of the objections to like good innovation and stuff. Games being different or deep is not like somehow just a rich person thing or something. Like you can just think about things and enjoy them. It's you already do that, and you would be able to if you did it with these things, provided you led up to them the right way. And that is something that all people can and most people do eventually do. It's not some elitist thing that no one can understand. Those works are arguably not that good. And I also think that's a thing. For example, as someone in the literature field, whether I want to say that about myself or not, when I took my English major course on like the canonical literature in English, or like I took a Shakespeare class, because of course I did. I mean, I didn't want to. I'm just saying it was the English department, so of course I did. I took a really interesting, good course on queer fictions, but that was mostly non-canonical. You know, like they just thought these were good books about queer culture, and I mostly agree. That was cool. That teacher was good. But yeah, anyway, you know, like reading Shakespeare or Paradise Lost, that was a particularly bad one, actually. It's not that I think Paradise Lost itself is so bad, or that Shakespeare is bad. I like a good amount of Shakespeare. The problem is that they are considered elementally good. They're considered good without explaining benefits of them or strengths of those works. A lot of you, statistically, have studied Shakespeare, whether you wanted to or not. Can you tell me what his strengths as a writer are relative to similar writers? His weaknesses, specialties, interests, his particular comportment? You can't. Neither can I. Have you read like a dozen works by Shakespeare? That's interesting. For other people that create things that you've consumed a dozen works of theirs, can you tell me for those people what their style is? I would imagine yes, it's extremely easy to do that. But in the Shakespeare classes that I took, we didn't talk about that for a single iota of the time in the class. Absolutely no time was spent on like, what is this? Like, we just assume it's obviously extremely good and start gushing about it. That's dumb. Like, that's the bone I'm throwing to these people. That doesn't mean that exploring the frontiers of art is dumb, but doing that is silly. Like, it's really fun to take a work that everybody accepts as being really good and to talk about what could actually be good about it, and also find the things that are not. Invariably, there are some. The Lord of the Rings is a really interesting example. You may rewatch the Lord of the Rings movies at some point. Use this as an opportunity to think about what you think is good about them, and you will easily find a few things that are bad about them too. A really commonly cited one, for example, is that the ghosts from that Aragorn brings to save everybody at the end of movie 3 are a complete Deus Ex Machina. They're not led up to at all. Which might be fine, but the story is a story that leads up to everything else. Just not that. Just kind of comes out of nowhere. That's weird. Sorry, I might have just made it slightly worse if you start noticing that, but I assure you, noticing all the actually legitimately good things in that movie will make it more better than this has made it worse. That's another thing. Accepting the idea that analyzing something will cause you to emerge the other side from analyzing it better off than you were, unscathed, and with more interesting things to think about. And that you don't have to be afraid of analyzing something you like and discovering that actually it's bad. That's not how entertainment works. You enjoying it is good, period. There's a separate thing you can do, which is to evaluate whether it's good mostly in and of itself, or whether you evaluate that it's bad, but you enjoyed it, therefore you are what is good. That's great. What excellent news. You were able to enjoy it despite it being in some ways demonstrably not very good. That's great. Good for you. That's excellent. It doesn't really do anything negative for you to acknowledge that, like, oh, it says something bad about me because I like this bad thing. It actually says something good about you, that you can extract entertainment from this otherwise questionable piece. That's cool. Go figure. Okay, shorter part 2, and this is my actual objection to the subject. Again, I don't personally think that it is a severe one. We're not in this parlay here to argue that it's bad to innovate, I'll say for the final time. But just to say that I think that, like I said at the beginning, it's not that effort and innovation are bad. They're very overwhelmingly often good. But the problem is when they are bad, it matters more. And so what do I mean by that? I'm just trying to say that for most games, the game would be improved more by not innovating. And I hope that that is uncontroversial when I put it a certain way. Most games, especially in the AAA space, seem to feel a need to stand out by doing something performatively different from other games, posturingly different than other games. But then not make the basic design something coherent for people. And the result is that the game is kind of a hollow, similar facsimile to something you played before. And a lot of the design is only vaguely there for a good reason. It's sort of what was called for or expected, but doesn't really do anything super specific, though. And then the game has some gimmick that is there for marketing. It was designed for the game to be able to be marketed. It is not well integrated into the game. Would the game be better if they made the basics of the game more appropriate parts of the game instead of putting that gimmick in? And I think you can agree with me that if we ignore money for a second, the answer is yes. If the game is more coherently fun, the parts of the game you play with are more fun, and the game isn't very original anyway, it would be better for those parts of the game to be more fun on a basic level. Now, the level below is that it might be that the game is so worthless to people who are interested in making video games that just the game trying something different is actually more valuable. An example, I think Sea of Thieves is not a good game. I hope I'm thinking of the right game? Sea of Thieves or... Sea of Thieves is wrong. Sorry. Skull and Bones? Game? What is... What the... I know this game exists. Skull and Bones. I hate the AAA industry so much. Ubisoft, you've foiled me again. Skull and Bones is a recent like pirate ship game. You don't need to know anything else about it than that. Now, it's got a lot of silly elements that you could make fun of. But here's something. If they just made it straightforwardly good, yes, I'm arguing that would be better for the game. Like the game itself, for the people that play the game, would likely be better if it was less ambitious, but the systems that were there were like complete, basically, is what I'm saying. However, is that actually more valuable to like the general population? It's really tricky. The level below, I think you say yes. It's better for it to be weird and bad because it's not of interest anyway. A perfect version of that game just isn't interesting enough to be valuable to people who are interested in the subject. So it's better for us if it just does something different. And if that then makes it more money and the general public doesn't necessarily care one way or the other, then isn't that better? The developer makes more money, the publisher makes more money, and we arguably get a bigger ad. The game was worthless to us as entertainment, but the society has more new ideas in it. As a simple example, perhaps the existence of Skull and Bones, and it wasn't exactly a dominant force in the industry, let's just say, may prompt some, to be blunt, better developers making a game that is an interesting, piratey ocean game. I feel like that's kind of an underexplored genre, and there's reasons for that we could unpack. Isn't that better for me than if the game was like better made, but not as ideaful? Yeah, it seems like it is. But the level below is that I personally think that people are underestimating the effect on the general audience. If the general audience thinks it's all the same. Okay, but we talked about in section 1, hold on, we don't care what the general audience actually thinks. I care what effect it has on them. Not what they think it has as an effect on them, but what effect it actually has on them. If they think they would prefer the AAA games to be good the way they are, but in actuality, if you made the game design better, they would marvel at how comfortable and smooth the game experience is. That is what matters to me, and I think that the general public experiencing better, more polished, actually solid game design would be a greater societal good at this point in time. I think for many games, and for the industry as a whole, showing people that game design is for fun. Game systems are for fun. Build systems, I always have to sneak it in, but it's always relevant, are there for fun. They're there to be fun. It's not a puzzle that you have to solve before you can play the game. It's there because it's meant to be fun to use. And the problem, in my opinion, is that at the moment, so few games actually successfully execute that innovating is now a silly distraction from getting the basics right. Let me give you my evidence. There's this thing in cinema and mostly amusement park design right now, 4D or like 4DX, or whatever it's called nowadays. This is the thing usually where they like spray a smell in your face, or like the auditorium moves when a dinosaur stomps onto the screen, or things like this, right? You add a different sensory element than sight to the experience of like watching a movie, or roller coasters are a place where this is sometimes applied. Roller coasters already move as you kind of see a movie. And then so if you add like a smell, yeah, previous Parley brought this up. Just Rusty, I think. Thank you for the example. That phenomenon is somewhat derided in the film community. And the reason is basically that it feels like it's getting away from the film being meaningful. It's trying to innovate without attaching an inherent benefit to the innovation. You're just saying, we can use this as a way to seem like we're doing something unique and cool, even if you don't think about it, and even if we don't think about it. We can just kind of staple this on, and people think, oh, that's like different and interesting. And it's more obviously different than like the plot of this movie is better and interesting and coherent. So it makes more money from attracting people who can see what the difference would be if they pay for this entertainment. But the problem is, it's not actually better entertainment most of the time. It simply doesn't add much to most movies for the auditorium to shake or a smell to be sprayed in your face. Partly because as I described before, they are kind of a form of what I called therapy or play, where it's sort of good actually that there aren't those other elements. Now, I think roller coasters are a great fit. It's a place where the goal of the roller coaster kind of is to do a sensory overload thing. And so the idea of adding further senses is fantastic instead, and doesn't feel like copping out. It feels like creating a more interesting experience for the rider. The rider is already trying to have that type of experience. You're not distracting from giving them the whole point of the roller coaster by doing this. It arguably is in line with the point of a roller coaster. But a movie, not as clearly. And of course, the criticism is like, I feel like you're doing this instead of writing a good story or instead of adding a human element. Again, here, unfortunately, I feel like I have to make an argument in a form I don't usually like. I'm arguing that when it's bad to innovate, it's bad, which, like, duh. Of course, like, yes, that's bad. And in rhetoric, I think it's a very bad form to do this most of the time. What I'm arguing here really then is that it is significant how often it is a bad idea, but people take it as a good, and then they just do it anyway, but the game would have been much better if they didn't. It's kind of unique to games as well. Games are many moving parts, perhaps the most moving parts of any existing human entertainment, and that means that getting all the basics reasonably oriented and sensible and good, getting the basic flow of the game, the basic mechanics of the game to be like straightforwardly coherent, they're all right, they're solid, you basically did it, is much harder than other pieces of art. Enough harder that we've crossed the threshold when we talk about video games from things like a book or maybe even a TV show or a movie, but those are certainly more elements. But let's say a book where it's not easy to get everything perfectly right or whatever, but it's like definitely possible for a single person to just basically have the plot be solid. You can have someone edit the book with you and you can read through it, and there are plenty of existing published books that have no major plot flaws or foibles and are still interesting. That's easy enough to do, not easy at all, but easy enough to do, possible, that the best writers can do it basically without major complaint from the audience, plus add some innovation. Great, so that's the place to add the innovation, yes. You see my problem. In video games, this just so rarely happens that moving on from that stuff to then create some flashy new thing, even if it genuinely is exploring the frontiers of design, often doesn't feel like it. It's just a weird, directionless gimmick. And putting more things in a piece that are less refined does make all of it worse, distracts you from individual pieces, makes you spend time on things that the game didn't polish as much or that aren't as related to the rest of the gameplay loop. It's bad. It's not terrible. It's not some horrible crime, but it's not better entertainment to do that, in my opinion. And I argue it's not better for society, necessarily. Yes, putting some weird ideas out there has a benefit, but I think it needs to be weighed against the benefit of getting the industry so used to these crappy designs and reducing the stock of like just well-made game design. Personally, I feel like that's coming back a little bit. There have been some cases where high-profile studios recently have made a really straightforward game instead uncharacteristic of them, and it's been like whatever, but at least they just made a coherent good game. Hi-Fi Rush and the Star Wars Jedi Survivor games come to mind as games that both of which I don't feel that high on, but they're from studios I expected to cut corners and be gimmicky, and instead they just did a straightforward game for once. And those have been received fairly well, though I believe the studio that made Hi-Fi Rush has been closed. That's just a terrible elemental thing about the industry right now. But I don't think it defies the point. That people, the industry, is very favorable now to like just make the game good. And it's interesting how crunch culture has changed that way too. Developers like Team Cherry making Hollow Knight Silksong have been variably encouraged or silk posted out of existence to make the game, you know, the best it can be, or God, please just release it really quickly. And you know, amazingly, we finally have it. When Silksong was released, I said, I'll believe that that game has been released when I have completed it. That is exactly how I feel to this day. When I have finished the game, I will believe that it is real. That's what we say to people that think Silksong is a real game. Go for it. Birds aren't real, you know. So that's my argument. I think that's really all I have to say. The thing I wanted to do with the parlay was to unpack some caveats, basically. People will not be sympathetic to innovation in art sometimes. That was kind of the first half. But I personally think most of those complaints are essentially invalid. They just make sense. I just don't think that means you should then not innovate. However, I do think there are some reasons to not innovate, specifically in game design, not in general artistic pursuit. And the reason is specific to game design is that game design is just complicated enough that basic functional game design is so rarely achieved. I don't think it behooves you to spend way more time and effort and resources innovating something that will itself also be incomplete, and just constantly make things that are entirely incomplete instead of trying to make something just as good as you can. Not flashy or not deep or not inaccessible or not marquee or worthy of rewards or not, but just good. Whatever way you think makes that the most good. And the talent of being a person who can analyze a thing they're making and say, what just makes it the best it can be? Not what I want, not what I would like to think of myself as, but what I actually am. What can make it the best it can be is hard. I don't pretend to be good at this or perfect at this. I try. You hear me in Parley say things like, this Parley isn't about that. So even though I want very much to go on a 10-minute tangent about this, it's just not related to the Parley. And if people are interested, I can bring it up that way, and you can ask if you want to. That's fine. And obviously you don't need to buy Parley to do that either. You can go on one of the streams and just say, hey, you said this offhand? What the hell are you talking about? Okay, we could talk about it. I have to ask you to pay for a Parley slot. If you want me to spend 45 minutes talking about it, sure. But I'm very happy to not scruple with this kind of thing. It's an important thing about Parley. I have to be willing to share my ideas and give them relatively freely, offering a paid option if you want me to do more. Plus, also, though, not go further with my ideas than actually benefits the client in this case. Sorry to be overly corporate, Mr. Food. You've been with us for quite some time, but just to say, this is not what you requested. I hope I fulfilled some of what you requested. It's a little bit of a weird one because you asked me to do a Parley about what I said I wanted to talk about. So it's didn't I fundamentally succeed? But my hope is that I talked about it in a way that addresses things you would be interested in people criticizing about these concepts. And therefore you found some that you can relate to, but you also don't think are that significant, and some that maybe you didn't think of and don't think are very significant. But then also some, I hope mine, that you think, oh yeah, okay, that does create some potential issues. I don't know, it's complicated. Having said this whole Parley, the caveat to the caveat, we can't just keep doing this, but don't commission another Parley where you say, give me the response to your responses. Please don't do that. You can. Anyway, you would say something like, okay, but you're a person who says that when people learn to write, they should write 5 books and not care what they are, and they can just be bad, and who cares? This is actually common writing advice. And then try to write serious books, but take, 5 or so and say, I'm just going to write 5 books, and it doesn't matter what they are. I'm going to explore my style. I'm going to invest in myself, and I'm just going to have fun writing some books. And if you don't want to do that, then first of all, you probably just don't want to be a writer in the first place. And second of all, it will let you find what you're interested in. Okay, I do agree with that philosophy. That is something I say, but I think that's a good way to learn. I don't think you should then publish those books. You could try to publish them and then see if they become an interesting story, polish them, and then maybe, sure, pitch them to a publisher. But the point of writing the books is that their primary purpose is not to be successful entertainment, which is why it makes sense to flagrantly innovate. So that advice does not contradict this idea. I personally think that is the same thing, and it's really good to flagrantly innovate, but that's just not necessarily the best way to make things for other people. Maybe that's less questionable or controversial. That's it, folks. If you enjoyed this Parley, I'd love it if you came back for more. You can even get your own like this one using a link in the description. Just sign up, and if you're happy with that amount per month, for me to do a little podcast specifically for you, we'd love to have you. Now, I said at the beginning of the Parley that this is a Parley where you don't need to have seen the Invisible Wall Parleys by Mr. Food. In fact, it might make a really good intro to them, and I think that's true. I think a really good way to get interested in something is to beat the shit out of it and then say, with identical rigor to how badly I criticized it, what do I think are possible strengths, even though I just ripped it to shreds? And then if there are some, yeah, you're probably interested in the subject. Like, go and take a look. So if you listened through all of this, I don't think the people that stopped at the beginning should watch the Invisible Wall series, but you maybe should or would enjoy it. They're Mr. Foot's big series of Parley. I will link that in the description if you would like. They didn't ask me to. I just think that's nice, and it was a cool series. It was a bumpy series, and really the first gigantic series of Parley I've done. But it was interesting. And something you are more likely to enjoy now that you've listened to this. Folks, thanks for supporting the show. I know some of you just pay on the Patreon because you appreciate these, and I appreciate that. But if you want to get your own, that's down there too. And if you're interested in the Invisible Wall stuff, that third is in the description. The description often has a lot of stuff in Parley. See you in the next one.